Support for the Brülosophy podcast comes from the following. Love to Brew is the #1 choice for your home brew holiday shopping. Award-winning beer recipe kits and beer making kits that both qualify for fast and free shipping. Perfect for the friend or family member who loves your beer but doesn't brew their own. Be sure to check out all Love to Brew has to offer at love2brew.com. The best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world. Find everything from classics to modern favorites, as well as cool experimental varieties and a vast array of ingredients and gear at yakimavalleyhops.com. What is up, people? Happy holidays. This is the Brülosophy podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and in this episode, Malcolm and I are going to be answering your questions. That's right, this is the second Brü A episode. We've been compiling questions since the last one, and you guys have submitted a ton. So unfortunately, we won't be able to get to all of them, but that just means we have a nice cache of questions to ask in the third episode. So yeah, Malcolm, how are things going out east?
Great. The weather's starting to get cold, which I don't mind here in Western PA, so I don't think my wife and kids feel the same way, but I look forward to a couple of fires and some snuggling nights. You know what I mean? I'd
imagine that where you live, at least, it's not very, even middle of December here, we might drop down into the 40s type of thing, but I would imagine that there's some beers that you really enjoy to drink with that nice cold weather to warm yourself up.
So not necessarily East Coast, but Sierra Nevada's celebration. So every year, look forward to it. Love that beer.
Oh my God, me too.
And Anchor's anniversary are what do they call it? Happy Holidays? I forget what they call it.
Yeah, their holiday one though. I know what you mean.
Yeah,
the celebration. I actually bought my first 12 pack of that. I think it was end of October, and this is not an advertisement for Sierra Nevada or Celebration Ale, but go get some. This year's is really good. I always buy a 12 pack to start when they first come out, to kind of start the winter season off. And this year's was just really surprisingly good. Very classic hop character, nice caramel in the finish, but it's not too sweet. I love that beer. Good call on that one. I've definitely gone out and bought many more 12 packs since. Before we get into answering your questions, we've got to go through this stuff that some people complain about. Anyways, we are always in need of experiment participants. So if you live in any of the following cities, please hit us up and we will try to get you hooked up with a contributor that lives closest to you. Chicago, Illinois, Denver, Colorado, Pueblo, Colorado, Anchorage, Alaska, way up there. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, that's where Malcolm currently lives, and then Atlanta, Georgia, where Malcolm is going to live, Corona, California, or right here in Fresno, California. Like I said, let me know, and we will get you in touch with a contributor who lives by you. If you have any questions that you want answered on a future Brü A episode, email them to me, marshall@brülosophy.com, or you can drop them on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or any of the other places we frequent online. We're also on Reddit all the time. Ask a question in one of our threads that we start, and we'll be sure to include it on the list. If your question doesn't get answered in this show or in one of the future shows, it is going to be on the list, I promise you. And it's just, we've only got so much time for these things. So if you're looking for a way to throw some support our way, head over to brülosophy.com/support, where you'll find a list of links to use when you shop at places that every homebrewer already shops at. You won't feel a thing, and we get a small commission that helps us to keep bringing you these shows. If you want a little something in return for your support, check out our Patreon, where for as little as $1 a month, you'll be granted access to never before published Brülosophy recipes, receive invites to monthly video chats, and you can even work with us to design your very own experiment. Lots of fun. That's over at patreon.com/Brülosophy. Finally, please make sure to subscribe to the Brülosophy podcast and leave a review wherever it is you listen to your podcasts. It's really important to us. It's a small little gesture on your part that really does matter to us. So we'd appreciate if you just go subscribe and leave a nice review. Okay, time for the 1-minute beer review with Jersey and Tim. Now, in the past so far, the majority of what we have done, I believe every review that I've had Jersey and Tim do so far has been a beer. But in this one, I thought I'd serve them, a festive. When I think of the holidays, we just finished with Thanksgiving a couple of weeks ago, and we're moving into Christmas holiday. I kind of think of spices and mulling spices, one of which is cinnamon. And so I serve them a drink that I think is very, very festive for this time of year.
1-minute beer review with Jersey and Tim.
You handed it to us in a shot glass, so it's going to be powerful. Cinnamon.
Definitely cinnamon.
I think. I don't think that it's beer. Wait. How about 10-second beer review?
Is this scope?
Should we sip it or should we shoot it?
I'm going with the shoot.
All right. Well, how about we toast?
Philosophy.
No, that's good toast, you corporate shill. Oh, God. Oh, Jesus. Oh, it's Fireball.
Definitely.
It's
What
so
is
good.
wrong with you?
It's so good. It's just so good. Oh, God, it's horrible. It's what, I mean.
Once you touch it to the lips.
How much are these mics? If I puke on this, is that bad? Oh, God. Talk about how you feel, Tim.
I feel good.
Oh, excuse
That
me.
hit the spot.
I feel horrible. It's burning. There's obviously fire.
So obviously, I served it in a shot glass. It had that reddish Fireball hue. These guys knew that it wasn't a beer. But man, kudos to them for their dedication to reviewing it as if it was. I had a shot with those guys as well. I love them. They're great people, and I do enjoy me a Fireball from every now and again. Malcolm, I'm certain the same is true for you.
Oh my God! Even just having them drink that on the air makes me a little sick to my stomach.
Oh no!
It just reminds me of bad decisions, sadness, and disappointment. I can't. Fireball and all those cinnamon derivatives. It smells like I don't know, bad beer days. Like because you go out drinking, so you start priming the pump. And then
Oh,
all your
I would
bro
never
friends,
do anything like that. No way.
they're all like, yeah, let's have some shots or whatever. And it's back when I was in my 20s or whatever, it was some cinnamon drink. Oh
Yeah.
my God.
I feel like Fireball's not that old, right? I mean, but maybe 7 or 8 years old, something like that.
There were other versions of it when I was
There is only one
Malcolm.
Fireball.
Yeah,
There's
only one Fireball. Like
Yeah.
all those like Goldschlagers and everything else like that. Just that cinnamon smell. It just.
I know. Honestly, it's cheap cinnamon liquor that does a good job warming me up. So, anyways, we're probably not going to be doing too many reviews of drinks like that, but figured I would for that. All right, when we get back, we're going to be going over a whole host of questions that you've asked us, so stick around. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste time chilling work, which is why I use cleverly designed immersion chillers from Jaded Brewing. After some bad experiences with counterflow and plate chillers, I began the search for a more efficient chilling solution and discovered Jaded. That was nearly 4 years ago, and to this day, I continue to rely on the King Cobra and the Hydra to chill my wort in record time without the setup or cleaning hassle of other chillers. If you're looking for a way to optimize your brew day, I can't recommend Jaded chillers enough. Go see what they have to offer at jadedbrewing.com and let them know Brulosophy sent you. When dumping wort-soaked grain and leftover low-gravity wort while cleaning up after a brew day, do you ever wonder what your true efficiency would be if that wort made its way to the kettle instead? Using the brew bag, a fabric filter for all mash tuns and brewing methods, allows you to capture every last drop of wort. Not only does this increase kettle efficiency, it lowers your grain bill, which saves you money. Throwing wort in the trash is like dumping a 12-pack down the drain and just doesn't make sense. Use the brew bag and leave no wort behind. I've been using these filters for a long time and recommend them to everyone. I never have to worry about a stuck sparge and cleanup is fast and easy. Go grab yourself a brew bag fabric filter at brewinabag.com and be sure to use code TBP17 at checkout to get a discount on your order. All right, so I got myself a beer. We're going to sit back and answer some of your questions. The first one comes from TJ Hawkins. My question is in regards to OG and finishing volume of wort at the end of the boil prior to pitching. I recently, and he says 6 months ago or so, switched from extract to a brew in a bag system, and my results have been, in my opinion, wonderful and completely confusing. Okay. I'm mashing in with about 7.5 to 8 gallons of water, which seems like it should be adequate for a 5-gallon batch. But at the end of the boil, I wind up with anywhere from 3.5 gallons to 4.5 gallons of wort and an OG 10 to 20 points higher than where it should be. So 1052 to 1062 instead of 1042. That's pretty nuts. His solution at this point, he says, has been to add sterilized water, much as I had when using extract kits. So not much different there until his OG comes down to where it should be, which seems to be right around 5 gallons of wort. He says he's probably boiling too aggressively, but wonders what, if any, problems he's creating by using this method.
Well, he's diluting, so as long as he ends up with the beer that he likes, does it matter? I don't think so. But funny enough, if you take 1052 and then you add about a gallon, you end up with 1042. So it sounds like he could probably just mash and sparge with a little more water and end up where he wants.
Which says to me, it says to me that he might be, using less water for his full volume brew in a bag mash than something's wrong with his equipment settings and whatever calculator he's using. I use Beersmith, and when I do brew in a bag on a 5.5 gallon batch, I'm usually upwards of 9.25 to 9.5 gallons of water, and that's when I'm not squeezing, I guess. But even with squeezing, I'm closer to 9 gallons of water. So I wonder if maybe he's got some sort of a setting. He says right here he ends with less volume of wort, which says to me that there needs to be more water in the mash, right?
Yeah, math works. So essentially, grain's going to absorb a given amount of water, right? It's like, I think they say it's like 10% by weight. So whatever, math works. So you get a predictable amount of water at the end of the sparge. And if you're getting less than what you need for your boil off, because most people boil off as long as you're doing it at the same boiling rate, it's going to be somewhere between 6 to 12%, depending on the geometry of your pot and yada, yada, yada. So once you know that your boil off is some odd percent, then you adjust your whatever, strike water. And if you sparge, some people don't sparge at all, like you said.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, my advice, TJ, would be...
What goes in comes out. So if you put more in, you'll get more out.
Right.
Is it causing an issue? So if the beer is good, no. Right? So if the beer is good, it's not a big issue.
But still, I can see where he's coming. To me, having to top up every time I brew when I shouldn't have to do that is an issue. I want to do it. I want to do it right. I want to do it the way that I'm expecting it to do, so that I can have predictable results. TJ, my advice to you is make sure check those equipment settings in whatever calculator you're using. If you're using Beersmith, which I do, I've done a series of tutorials. Just go over to brulosophy.com and search for Beersmith, and you'll see one on equipment settings. My guess is that's going to get you where you're going to, or where you want to go to.
You can even do a dry run and use the equipment calibrator on Beersmith, and you find out like, oh, this is how much water my different vessels leave behind. So you have like that dead volume and everything.
Yeah.
So it's pretty easy. Once you get it figured out, you do it once and it's done.
Yeah. All right. Moving on to the next question.
All right. This is from Lee O'Shea in Melbourne, Australia. Brulosophy crew, when do you measure mash pH? Hopefully it's not a silly question. I've been trying to step up my game. I bought a pH meter and studied the book on water adjustment. I'm trying to predict the water adjustment to get a target pH at the end of the mash. Surely this is then too late to make the water adjustment if the pH is out.
So
what say you?
So it sounds like the spelling of this name is difficult for me because I don't know if it's a male or a female. It's Lea, so it's either Lee or Leah. So I apologize if I get the gender wrong here. It sounds like what Lee is asking is basically whether or not adjusting the pH of the mash at the end of the mash it will work. I don't know. How are you reading this one, Malcolm?
So I like this question because I like water. So essentially, what are we adjusting pH for? So we won't do a whole pH lesson. We'll do a very quick one. pH in the mash is said to affect the enzymes and thus affect the mash conversion of starches to sugars. It's also said to affect the potential for pulling tannins out of the grain, right?
Right. Higher pH is said to encourage the extraction of tannin from grain.
Yeah, more soluble tannins into the wort.
Right.
In the boil, higher pH, you get more utilization of your hops, potentially too harsh if it's too high. And if you go too low, potentially not enough extraction, right? And if you don't have the right pH in the boil, you could affect your coagulation, the protein break and the hot break. Mm-hmm. And then in the final product, it could affect both mouthfeel and the brightness or dullness of the beer. So that's just a quick 100 level course on pH. Now, if he says, or she, pardon me, if Leah says that it's out when he checks it at the end, well, then I would make a note of it, and then next time I would adjust it.
Right.
But if the beer tasted fine, why do you care?
Yeah. Well, and there's an argument to be made for the, that the boil pH matters, and that, that the pH at different points on top of mash pH can have an impact. And obviously the pH of the finished beer matters in terms of tartness and whatnot. So, the
opener was when do you measure? So I measure about 10 to 15 minutes in. I always measure then.
Yeah, likewise.
And then if it's out, I usually actually don't adjust it because it's usually not that far out.
I know. I'm almost too lazy to adjust it at that point.
Yeah. So what I will do is, when I start to boil, because your boiling in itself will lower the pH about 0.2 pH units on average. So if I'm a bit too high and I'm worried about getting too harsh of a hop character, I'll adjust right there in the boil kettle. I'll add a couple mils of acid, and actually what you can do is go into Brü water. You can see where your pH is predicted by Brü water, where it is as measured, and then you can add some acid. And it's not an exact science here, but say you needed to add an extra, milliliter of lactic. Well, you can add it now, and it will drop your pH. You can see on the spreadsheet. Mm-hmm. So you add another couple, 1 milliliter of lactic acid. When you add it, you should see the coagulation improve. That happens around 5.2-ish, plus or minus. So you can adjust there, and then through fermentation, you'll usually drop about, about a half pH unit, maybe a little more, 0.6. So then you're tasting your beer. If you think it's a little too dull or a little too bright, you can adjust it there with either acid or pickling lime.
Yeah.
So you can adjust it along the way.
Yeah. I think the simplest answer, Lee or Leah, whatever you go by, the simplest answer is that we both are adjusting our pH prior to, we're adjusting our water chemistry prior to mashing, and then the pH check that we do 10 to 15 minutes into the mash is more of an insurance check for me, at least. And I'm not typically going to adjust it from there, but it gives me that security of knowing, that I hit my pH. Okay.
Yeah. Take the notes down and then adjust next time.
Yeah.
Basically.
So next question from Reddit user Duster72X. Asks, is it possible that most of the brewing preconceptions that you guys have been proving incorrect, I don't like the word proving so much, but that we've been showing are incorrect, are largely based on improvements in agricultural technology and material handling? Ooh, this is a good question. He says, since we are using agricultural products that vary from year to year and region to region, it seems likely that many of the things that may have been true 10, 20, or 50 years ago just aren't true anymore due to improvements in things like barley production. And I imagine he's thinking about malting as well, the science of malting. I don't know anything about this, he says, but it seems like a good guess for the podcast would be an expert on agricultural technology, somebody from Brü A, maybe. Malcolm, this is a fantastic question. It's something I've thought a lot about, and particularly with certain variables like fermentation temperature.
Oh, that's a loaded question, man. So
there's going to be a lot of conjecture, I imagine, in this response.
I like that one sentence he has. I don't know anything about this because
amen, right?
I am not an expert on this either. But my guess would be to say that the people who brew beer for a living, and the texts that are written for them that people quote a lot,
yeah,
I think they might hold true. Might is even the soft word for their processes, for their equipment, for what they're making, right? So I don't think grain has changed that much in the last some odd 25 years. Certain things might have changed, like the degree of enzymatic power, diastatic power. So yes, grains might be hotter, as they like to say, enzymatically, so they're more less reactive to temperature, but more apt to convert fully.
Yeah.
We've altered the protein amounts on some of these standard base malts, but incorrect is, like you said, incorrect is the wrong, or proving is the wrong words. Basically, what we're showing is that in some cases, at their home brewing level, people aren't able to tell. There's a difference between being able to tell and be able to measure with an instrument.
Absolutely.
Home brewers, we're not brewing in 5-7 locations across the U.S. or the world. So one little difference, we're still driving by Braille, but maybe we're a little bit better than that. But we're in the lines, and people just can't always tell. That's all.
Yeah, it seems to me, thinking about ingredients in general, right? We've got grain, and I think it sounds to me like he might like this Reddit user might be kind of alluding to our decoction experiment, the one that you did, Malcolm. It's true that. I have this way of thinking about this stuff, right? So decoction was developed not from all of the research I've done, not necessarily as a flavor enhancer, but as a way to get better extraction, to improve the brew house efficiency, right? And from that, it became, I'm going to air quote the word known, that by doing that, you are also developing these melanoidin characteristics, right? Well, nowadays we've got this hot malt, or these malts that don't require any sort of decoction in order for us to, get that 75 to 80% brew house efficiency. So it's no longer required, as it were. And so the question then becomes, do we do it because of what we believe to be this flavor impact? While we haven't proven decoction wrong or incorrect by any means, the data that we have collected has shown that it doesn't seem to produce that big of a difference. It doesn't seem to when compared to a single infusion mash. So stuff like that. Another ingredient that I think about with this one. This is one of those questions, Duster72X, that could go on forever, I'm sure, with the response. Another one is yeast. The conditions when lager brewers, and I'm sure people out there are going to get pissed off when they hear me talking about this, but when the people who developed the lagers that we love so much today, those styles, they were limited by their environment. They were limited by the conditions that they had to brew beer in. And, it favored these yeasts that could perform very well at lower temperatures. And that's great. That seems to have created this belief almost that because they work so well, at cold temperatures, obviously you're not supposed to ferment them warm. And on some scientific measurable level, some objective way, we can measure that a warmer fermentation might produce more esters. But is that perceptible? Do tasters pick that up? Is it going to ruin a beer if you ferment a lager using the Weihenstephan strain at 70 degrees? And what we've been finding consistently over and over again, in fact, our most recent experiment on the topic back in November was Jake's fermentation temperature experiment with Imperial Organics Global Yeast, which is the Weihenstephan strain. And it came back non-significant. And, so it's that kind of stuff to me is, I feel like sometimes if we just kind of think a little bit differently about things and we don't extrapolate from the fact that we had to do it one way and that means that it was the best way. I don't know if I'm even making sense anymore.
Well, no, I do. And this is a philosophical question. So there's numbers behind it. Like, I'm sure we could take those two beers at the temperature extremes and send them into a lab and say, oh yeah, you have this much more of isoamyl acetate and ethyl hexanoate, right? Like,
yeah.
Oh my God, see, I told you temperature matters. I go, yeah, I agree. That machine can detect that. And then I serve it to people and they go, hey, I can't tell. Well, all these large and successful brewers, they have trained tasters who are given a specific beer at a certain way over and over and over and over again. So maybe they can tell. But in a casual drinking environment, like I don't know how many of you guys go into, your local watering spot with a, calibrated tasting device, some gas chromatograph or, what have you. But I don't. I just go in with my palate, my tongue, my nose, my ability to smell and taste, and I just go in and either enjoy the beer or I don't. So if I can't tell, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
You know, now it does seem that the average taster in some, you know, some people will say in an almost like a derogatory manner, you know, your friends in your garage can't tell. Well, my friends in my garage taste beer often. And if I go to like a large brewery here in Pittsburgh and I give it to 50 people and they can't tell, that certainly makes me scratch my head.
Yeah.
You know?
And honestly, you know, there's a level of arrogance that comes with presuming that you would be able to tell a difference. You know, but yet, you know, a majority of people over here couldn't, type of thing. But we don't need to get into that. Duster, hopefully we answered the question. That's one that could go down that philosophical rabbit hole pretty quickly.
All right. Reddit user MH4130. Do you think performing the same experiment multiple times with different yeast strains would change your results?
My opinion on this one. Absolutely. Yeah, I do think it would. Already, if you just look at fermentation temperature, you know, one of the more fascinating variables that we've studied, in my opinion, it looks like English strains, at least the popular Fuller strain, is a little bit more sensitive to fermentation temperatures than, say, something like the Weihenstephan strain. So, and I don't think it's just fermentation temperature. I think there are a few other things where, you know, the genetics of particular yeast strains could cause or you know, end up in different results.
Yeah, some strains, such as the Chico strain, seem to be more tolerant to, you know, being jostled about either temperature or wort makeup wise.
They're less sensitive, right?
Yeah. Well, counterintuitively,
They don't get butthurt. They don't get butthurt so easily.
but you know, some of the Belgian strains and English strains, and maybe even some of the more fickle lager strains, they will get a more discernible difference.
Yeah.
With changing temperatures and changing wort nutrients or oxygen levels. But, you know, the Weihenstephan strain is known for its tolerance, and so is the Chico American Ale strain. You know,
And
those, and which makes them great for beginning brewers, are people who just don't pay much mind to that. You know, if you know.
I think it speaks a lot to why they're so popular. So, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. From Jonas, and I'm going to, this one's, I have a feeling this guy's from Scandinavia. Jonas Hallar.
He's actually a neighbor of mine, but go ahead.
Oh, is he really?
No, that was,
Oh,
I just wanted to say
jeez,
that.
man. It made me feel bad. All right. Okay, Jonas, we're just going to call you by your first name. He asks, for your fermentation methods, you leave the beer at temperature X for 2 to 5 days. OG dependent. What does this mean? To you...
OG means original gangster.
Yeah, that's totally who we are. Do you ramp it up after a certain attenuation? What's the benchmark here and why? How does this differ for different ales, lagers, low gravity, high gravity beers, and why does it make a difference at all?
Well, I don't do too much of this jostling about. I kind of let it go for, I don't know. Yeah, I guess I let it go for 2 or 3 days, and then if I want to do this temperature ramping, then I'll do it as temperature begins to wane, or not temperature, as activity begins to wane. But OG dependent, I think, means bigger beers often take longer to ferment. So you basically stretch out that timeline. You know, if a 1080 beer is going to take me, well, if a 1045 beer, which is the playground that I'm in often, 1045, 1050, those beers might take me 4 days, 5 days max. So after day 2 or 3, I'll start, you know, changing my temperature profile.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. You know, my thing is I will ramp almost every beer, and it's just I do it as a matter of course. It's like second nature for me. And you know, for whether it's an ale or a lager, I do it to drive off, you know, to kind of ensure complete attenuation and then to drive off any potential off flavors like, you know, diaster, like a D-rest or whatever. I'm not sure if there's a benchmark. I'm with you, Malcolm. I don't tend to brew too many big beers, but even when I do, my typical approach is, you know, I pitch the yeast. I usually have activity within 12 hours when I go back and check. Once I see a Kreuzen on the beer, I'll let it go for 2 to 3 days, and then I just ramp it up to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, which is close to 20 degrees Celsius. and just kind of let it sit until it finishes up. And that's just the way I do it. I know people, I know lager brewers who are pitching at 48 degrees, and they never raise the temp. They just leave it there, and they're making great beer as well. So does it make a difference? I think there's a positive correlation between temperature and fermentation activity. We've been able to demonstrate that in all of our fermentation temperature experiments. So yeah, it makes a difference, I think, on that front. But in terms of flavor and whatnot, that actually, I'm surprised we haven't tested that, Malcolm, like a diacetyl rest experiment.
Yeah. Huh. I think it would kind of depend on the yeast too. Some yeast will kick more diacetyl than others. So I know for some of the Belgian strains, I like to kind of massage them warm. Just kind of keep. I usually pitch them like 68, 70 and kind of keep pushing it, especially a Saison, because I want it to dry out on me. For real big beers, I just kind of let it go, But I just don't get a lot of stuck fermentations. So Lars Minor, best total approach to juicy New England IPA, as pertaining to grains, mash, hops, mid fermentation, dry hop, etc.
Yeah, so he's referring to the biotransformation dry hop there, right? Best total approach. Honestly, it's such a novel style. I would say that there are a few things that, in my mind, are what make any IPA and any IPA. And I know people disagree with this out there. The first thing is high chloride to sulfate ratio. So it has the water chemistry is high in chloride. I'll usually go 2.5, 3 to 1 is what I've been doing that I've been happy with.
And I'm gonna interject here and say I'm closer to 1 to 1, maybe slightly higher on chloride. So there you go.
And relative to I should this disclaimer. I'm talking about this relative to standard IPA, which is typically viewed as being high in sulfate. 1 to 1 to me is not what you would do for at least not what I would do for a standard. I call it standard, but a clear, normal, I guess, West Coast IPA. Right. So in my opinion, it's a higher than you would typically do chloride levels in your brewing water, and then it's the inclusion of some sort of a flaked adjunct, something like flaked oats is what I've been sticking with. We've done a experiment showing that flaked oats didn't seem to have much of a difference in terms of making the beer distinguishable, and compared to even wheat malt, it didn't produce a distinguishable difference. But that does seem to be a part of most commercial NE IPAs out there. The other thing would be fermenting with a notably ester-centric English ale type of yeast. I think the couple most popular out there right now are the popular kind of Conan strain, also known Imperial Organics sells it as Juice. Other people have it as like Barbarian, stuff like that. And then of course there's the I'm sorry. Imperial Organics sells it as Barbarian, and then they also offer their Juice, which is the 1318 London Ale 3. I believe that is Boddington's yeast. That's the yeast from the Boddington's brewery. So to ferment with something like that, and then, of course, to add a large dose of dry hops at high krausen, which is, about 24 to 48 hours into fermentation is when I've done it. And if you really want to bump it up, this is a high hop rate type of style. You add another dose of hops either when you're kegging into the keg, or you can do it in primary, which is the way I've typically done it. So those are kind of the things that I do when I'm making the few times that I make any IPA. Malcolm, is there anything different there that you would do?
Well, I just said the ratio, so I stick to almost 1 to 1 sulfate to chloride, maybe a little bit heavier on chloride. I like about 20% plus or minus 5% flaked adjunct, either oats or wheat and or both. I like to get about half my bitterness from a 60-minute edition, and then I get the rest of it from a Whirlpool edition.
That's a good one too, yeah. Low bitterness.
Yeah, low bitterness, at least not as high as a standard IPA. I like to do that biotrans, whatever you want to call it, hop. To me, I think I can tell. Something that we definitely need to look into more. But I do about 2 or 3 days into fermentation, and then I usually adjust my hopping intensity with a dry hop or keg hopping. So that's and I like London Ale 3, which is 1318, but I also like 007 from White Labs.
Very good. Hopefully that
dry
helps you out,
English.
Lars. Next question comes from this is a really interesting first and last name combo. This is on Facebook. Troy Turtroy. Awesome. I'm assuming that's not real, but if it is, that's rad. Anyways, other than for experiments and New Zealand conferences, do you do short and shoddy brews? I love this question. Malcolm, have you ever made a short and shoddy brew outside of the one where we homebrew conned the participants in a conference that we went to?
So my short answer for what Marsha would like would be no. I don't often do them, but I'd have done them. So I mostly brew more traditional. I think among our contributors, I'm probably the more dogmatic, but not, I don't necessarily believe in it. It's more like tradition. So I tend to follow more traditional methods.
Malcolm, just don't let your dogma shit on my lawn, dude. Keep your dogma shit out of my beer. Yeah.
But I do brew these occasionally for events and for friends. Like I must say I did it's not a true short and shoddy, but it was a grain to glass 9 days golden ale. English golden ale, 9 days. So I took some shortcuts doing that, and it was like a 3-hour brew day, and it did quite well locally here in some competitions. So I do them occasionally, mostly for cranking beers out real quick, but as a general rule, I brew traditionally.
Almost every batch that I brew is for an experiment or for the Hop Chronicles. Something like that. So not really. There have been times though where, I have zero issue these days, say like cutting down my mash length to 30 minutes instead of 60, or my boil length, if it fits with the style that I'm making, cutting 30 minutes off of my boil. And to this day, I've yet to have a single issue with doing that. However, because of the fact that so much of what I brew is for an experiment, and I'm usually doing 2 batches side by side, I found that trying to abbreviate the brew day on 2 batches simultaneously really makes for a hectic brew day. So I typically stick to, your standard hour-long mash and hour-long boil, only to spread things out a little bit and to give me a little bit more time to take care of other things. So that being said, I have brewed quite a few short and shoddy batches just for friends. Like Malcolm said, somebody needs a batch of beer wants I just want something to crush, in the middle of the summer, and I'll brew these up, and they're fantastic. I have a local friend who has lately been doing kind of American premium style Pilsners using this method. And I'm telling you, they're coming out absolutely fantastic. He brews them now for his events. He's a rock climber, and he takes these to these rock climbing events, and people can't get enough of it. So it works great. Yeah, I'm not sure if that's the answer you were looking for, but it works real good.
All right, moving on to Matt Cleety. He asks about Vorloff speed with mash tun on batch sparge. So will it cause channeling or reduce efficiency, or is Vorloffing even needed on batch sparge? What say you, Marshall?
Vorloffing on batch sparge is not used necessarily for the same purposes as it would be on fly sparging. The Vorloff on a batch sparge is usually, at least as far as I learned, the main reason you do it when you're batch sparging is to set the grain bed so that little specks of grain and grain husk don't end up in your boil kettle. You're not with batch sparging. You're not gonna channeling's not an issue. That's one of the beauties of batch sparging. You don't have to worry about channeling and losing efficiency that way. When I used to batch sparge, I do 100% no sparge nowadays with my larger mash tuns, but. I'd open the valve all the way. I even stopped Vorloffing altogether because to me it didn't matter, and it didn't make a difference. We've done some experiments to show that doesn't seem to make much of a difference. You're not going to increase your efficiency. Now, if you have a pump and you're doing a continuous recirculation throughout your mash, yeah, you might see a bump in your efficiency, but that's a little different than a Vorloff.
Well, that is, that by definition that's a Vorloff, but. You're basically taking from the bottom and putting back to the top until you clear up. But the whole premise of a batch sparge is you're not rinsing, you're draining. You put everything into solution and you just drain it away.
Exactly.
And so that's one of the beauties of it. Less variables, it's quick, and once you get used to doing it, you can make adjustments to optimize your process. So
absolutely.
I do like a stir halfway through. And I don't do a full batch, what do you call it, a no sparge. I do like a 3/4, 1/4.
Yeah.
So that's how I do it. I batch sparge, and then I stir it. I add an extra gallon or two depending on the batch size. Stir it up and then do it again. So
Cool. All right. Next question comes from Todd Hraiswu.
can we have a Smith, please?
Here we go. Are cell counts and temperature control concerns overblown? For the many pitch rate experiments, the only one to show significance was ale versus lager in a Kolsch. For the fermentation temperature experiments, it was 3470 taken to the extreme, 27C, which I believe was 82 degrees Fahrenheit, and the 002 experiment, which you thought had a barely noticeable difference. Additionally, pitching lager yeast warm versus cold produced different beers, but the warm pitch was preferred, more lager-like, counterintuitively. So are homebrewers overly concerned with these things?
I think that a good healthy pitch rate and a good healthy pitch, meaning the amount and the health of the yeast, covers a lot of sins. It's,
It's good
and
insurance,
braces.
yeah?
It's belts and braces, as the English would say. So it's good insurance. And, a lot of things can be rectified by good, healthy fermentation. So
Yeah.
overly concerned, it depends on how neurotic you're getting with these things. Do I think a home brewer in his garage needs to do cell counts? No. Do I think you should be doing generally good practices? That's air quotes for Marshall there with good practices. But, I wouldn't take a 1-year-old warm stored vial or pouch or whatever, version of yeast you're using and say, well, pitch rates don't matter, and chuck it in. But I think as long as you use some common sense, then you should be fine.
Yeah, I think overly concerned kind of has a tone of judgment, so I'm not going to say that. It's a hobby, and if you like being overly concerned about stuff or whatever, fine, so be it. I do think that there are certain things that maybe we've focused on a bit more than maybe we need to, and that could be a remnant of a past when things like yeast, just weren't as high of quality as they are today. So thanks, Todd.
All right, Mikael from Sweden. Most of your experiment triangle tests are made after a relatively short time. One's concern for me has been shelf life and flavor stability over time, and the experiments almost never really take that into account. I mean, for example, if a short 15-minute boil versus regular 60-minute boil didn't give significant results after 3 weeks, it may have had an effect in the long run. It would be nice to hear a few discussions on this topic and what you think.
Yep, I think that's a good one, and these are aging experiments. We've done a few. Obviously one of the issues is they require time, and so, but I definitely think what you're saying. If for example, one that I've been thinking about a lot lately is kettle trube and the impact that kettle trube might have on a beer that sits around for a long time. I think on a practical level, I'm just not the type of person who lets beer sit around very long. I make a batch, and 2 months after it's been brewed, it's already gone. I drink it all, and so I tend to like my beer fresh. I feel like this idea that beer has to be aged, again, could potentially be kind of this remnant of a past where fresh beer just wasn't very good, and you age it long enough, and the vinegar takes over or something like that. But yeah, I see what you're saying, Mikhail, and I think it's a good suggestion. We've definitely got some experiments on the list to test that stuff out. Okay, next question comes from Simeon, and he says, high gravity beers like barley wines and the Brewdog stouts, the ones that are 15%, are very hard to brew. Hitting the efficiency required for such a brew, the space in the mash tun for all the grain, and good yeast control are key. So far, I've failed to get a tasty 14% stout. I would like some tips or hints if you can suggest anything. Malcolm, take it away. I've never brewed anything nearly that big.
So a guy goes in the doctor and says, "Hey doc, it hurts when I do this." And the doctor says, "Stop doing that."
Yeah.
So
and just add a whole bunch of sugar.
Yeah. So I don't do a lot of huge beers, but I do 2 or 3, maybe 2 a year. So I just did a really large barley wine and aged it in a whiskey barrel. And one of the ways I hedged my bets was, per a previous question, was a big, healthy dose of yeast. So large pitch rate and high viability, or high vitality, I should say. So I got it from a local brewer, which is, kind of spoiled in that regard. And I just gave the beer a lot of oxygen and a bunch of yeast. And what I did is I held back some of the sugar I was going to use to help dry it out a little bit. And added it incrementally, and we have an experiment about that on I think a Belgian triple or a Golden Strong.
Yeah.
But you know, the methods of doing high gravity beers kind of go into the whole healthy yeast, lots of oxygen, incremental feeding. You know, that's what BrewDog I think does. I think they do incremental feeding as well.
Yeah.
Get it going, high krausen, and then add some of your sugars. Be that, you know, molasses, honey, just regular sugar, you know, just regular white sugar, cane sugar, or whatever else you're using. One of the other methods you can do is nutrients. You can add nutrients, which helps, you know, fermentation, yeast health. But I think a lot of it comes down to maybe don't go from brewing 5% pale ales to 15% stout. Maybe walk yourself up. Maybe try an 8% stout or porter, and then maybe a 10 or 11%, 12%. You know, don't go from, you know, first gear to fifth gear.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, I don't know about you, Malcolm, but I'm getting real thirsty. So I'm going to go grab myself another beer, and we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to finish answering these questions. As you can tell, we're going a little bit longer on this episode than we normally do, but that's because we want to be as thorough as possible. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Compact and simple to use with a small footprint for brewing indoors, the Grainfather makes it easy for you to brew professional quality beers at home. The Grainfather is an all-in-one brewing system that lets you brew all grain beer in a single compact stainless steel unit. It uses an electric heating element and pump to maintain a constant temperature and to circulate the wort during the mashing and cooling stages. It also comes with a counterflow chiller to reduce chilling times and produce high quality wort. And now, with the addition of their conical fermenter, the Grainfather takes things one step further by offering homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation just like commercial breweries use. And with the Grainfather Recipe Creator and Connect app, you can easily design a recipe, sync your brewing system with your phone, and then just sit back and relax as the app takes over and assures that you maintain your scheduled mash temps and boil schedule. Head to Grainfather.com to purchase your all-in-one brewing system today and to sign up for their free recipe creator tool. Once more, head on over to Grainfather.com, that's Grainfather.com, and get started today.
Founded in 1978 by brewing pioneer Charlie Papazian, the American Homebrewers Association is a division of the Brewers Association focused specifically on protecting and promoting the hobby of homebrewing. In addition to their work lobbying for the rights of homebrewers across the country, they're also the primary sponsor of brewlosophy.com. By joining the AHA, not only are you supporting their cause, but you get a ton of benefits as well. Discounts at breweries across the U.S., early access to tickets for events like the Great American Beer Festival, and you get to attend HomebrewCon, the world's biggest gathering of homebrewers. Head over to brewlosophy.com/AHA now to sign up to become a member. Malcolm, next question.
All right, so from Ben, he has a question about techniques to speed up the brew day, and he mentions a couple of the short mash, nose barge, short and shoddy techniques. But he also wants to know about other things that we could try, such as split brew day, no vorlaughing, and at what point do you think it might harm the beer, and any other time savers that we have tried?
So I really like this question, and I don't think my response is going to be very long. I feel like this is one of those things that can only be based on personal experience. I've done the shortest brew day that I've done for a 5-gallon batch was a 20-minute mash and a 20-minute boil. Those are really the two big time sinks in brewing. And as far as shaving time off of the required methods that you have to do. You have to mash your grains, in order to extract the sweet wort. There's other things that I found that I can do that really speed up the brew day as well. For example, we recently reviewed the Brew Hardware Hot Rod Heat Stick. It works on a 120 volt, 1500 watt, heat stick that you can. What I did, and it's been working beautifully, is I bought a smart plug off of Amazon. It's called a Wemo smart plug. And I plug my hot rod heat stick into that, and then I set it up on a timer to turn on about 2 hours before I'm going to wake up to go out and brew. Right off the bat, there's about, depending on my batch size, between 25 and 45 minutes shaved off of my brew day. So I wake up, I go out, I mash in, I come inside, I make breakfast, do all that kind of thing. 20 minutes later on a short and shoddy brew day, I'll go back out. I collect 100% of my sweet work because I'm doing a no sparge brew. And I throw that in the boil kettle and I bring that up to for a 20-minute boil. And then from there, I just chill it. You could do no chill. That might cut some time off your brew day. But I use a Jaded Brewing King Cobra as my go-to immersion chiller. And then I rack it into sanitized fermenters and let it sit in my chiller until it drops down to my target fermentation temperature. And pitch yeast, ferment warm, I ferment almost all of my beers these days at ale temperature. So that's about as quick as I think I can cut it down to, about 2.5 hours altogether with all of the planning and the stuff I do the night before, collecting water and milling my grain.
Yeah, staging stuff too. So having things already staged helps a lot.
Absolutely. Ben also asks about repeatability. He says that it's an important aspect of scientific experiments. Are there any experiments you would particularly like to faithfully repeat? And why? I mean, I think all of us would respond to this maybe a little bit differently. Malcolm, are there any experiments you want to see continue coming back the same way they have?
Oh, do I want to see them coming back, or do I want to keep repeating them? So I want to see all of them repeated as much as possible.
Yeah.
The fermentation temperature ones really have me scratching my head. So, I'd like to try them with the obvious answer beers like Kolsch's. Well, no, because Kolsch's, a yeast that does better at different temperatures. So, maybe some of the Pilsners and Hellas's. I was kind of surprised by the original Gravity, the staggered sugar addition one for the Golden Ale, or a Belgian Golden Ale, Golden Strong. So those all have to do with yeast stress. So the yeast stress ones are the ones that are the most interesting to me. And perhaps to the chagrin of some, I would like to see the low O2 stuff done again.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, especially with the fermentation temperature stuff, and we absolutely plan to continue repeating those. Ben also wonders, are there any experiments you think are false positives? False positive would mean, just to put this out there, that it was significant when it really the results were significant when in reality there's not a real difference there. I have to believe that Ben is asking if maybe some of the results are false negatives. Which would be, I
don't want to put words into his mouth, but
I'm gonna answer it like that's what he meant. But
and due to my nature, I question everything, but I also trust our processes. So especially when you're involved in the experiment, you're like, I did everything I could to make these beers fairly similar. And I've been brewing for quite a while, and I think I'm okay at it, So sometimes when a variable comes back as projecting a non-significant result, I question it, and I question, what did I do? That's my nature. And so every time something that comes back that I question, I want to do it again. So everything that comes back against conventional wisdom, I want to do again.
Yeah, and I'll take it even a step further. I'm skeptical to the core, and so I know it's easy to presume that just because we're the ones writing these results up that we're somehow married to them. That is so far from the truth. Do I think that there have been any false positives? I really don't think so. I think the one false positive that comes to my mind that could potentially have been, at first at least, was when the first fermentation vessel experiment, where I compared like an old used bucket to a PET carboy. That could have been a false positive. Our sample size was only 10 participants, but 7 out of 10 people being able to guess it right and being able to discuss their what they perceived as being different. That seemed pretty significant to me, and we've continually kind of shown that different fermentation vessels do seem to have an impact on beer character. But that's the beauty of replication, right? Is that you reduce the chances of that false positive or a false negative actually being the case. Thanks for the questions. Those were fun ones to answer. Next one comes from Bruce Greenberg.
That's right. How much time does the beer really need in the fermenter before I start the process of cold crashing gelatin and packaging? And are there any noticeable benefits to additional weeks of conditioning? And he goes on to talk about his process, and he's a standard primary, secondary guy, and he says he has about a 3 to 4 week turnaround. And he was wondering if he thinks that's necessary. And he did say that he recently eliminated the secondary fermenter from his process.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't used a secondary. I kind of hate that term, secondary fermentation, because it's not really it. You're racking it with the hope that it makes your beer somehow clearer. I think gravity works the same regardless, but whatever. My typical turnaround is between 2 and 3 weeks. But I brew mostly beers that are, mostly ale or lagers fermented like ale that are in the 1045 to 1052 range. Like that's my wheelhouse. That's what I know. And those tend to ferment faster just because they're lower OG. So yeah, I think if you're turning them around in 3 to 4 weeks and you're happy with your results, that sounds about right to me. I think that's probably where most people are falling.
Yeah, nothing to add. The beer is ready when it's ready.
Yeah. So Bruce also wonders what we do with our trube when we're cleaning our fermenter.
That's a good question.
It's a great question. Yeah.
So I'm a greenie. So I like to try to put it in the composter, but my neighbor is a great gardener, and she was telling me that you have to be careful, and I don't know as much about this as I'd like to know, but you have to be careful with the amount of organic material versus carbon rich versus protein and nitrogen rich material. So I was only adding a little bit, and unfortunately the rest of it goes down the drain. Yeah.
I pour it straight down the drain. I have a utility sink in my house, and it goes right down the drain, and I shed a tear every time those living organisms dwindle down the drain in my sink. So all right, next question comes from Tom Damratoski. He asks, I just started fermentation of a Czech Pilsner, and I'm debating how to cold crash and transfer. I followed your lager and fining method with success on your Hellas kit. He says that Love to Brew is his local homebrew shop. That is awesome. I would love to live close to Love to Brew. Problem is for the beer. I want to share with some Indian friends who are vegetarian, so gelatin is out. I want to get Brulosophy Crew's input for which is best to get this into a keg as simply as possible, as clear as possible, and with no oxidation. He goes over some options, but Malcolm, what would you do? What's your suggestion for Tom?
Well, I like the simple as possible, clear as possible, no oxidation. It reminds me of that sign you see at some of those places where it says you can have it quick, you can have it cheap, or you can have it right. But you have to you can't have all three. Pick two. So, obviously you can, hit all those things, but the degree of difficulty goes up and how much time and equipment you're willing to spend. So, yeah. I would say time works for clearing. Get the beer cold in the serving vessel, and like a keg, and that'll work if you want to go that route. You can use Biofine Clear, which is a salicylic, am I saying that right? Salicylic acid, which is like a sodium dioxide colloidal solution in an acid, right? So that works well. It works somewhat differently. I think it's opposite polarity as gelatin, but the end result seems to be pretty good. So that's vegan friendly, and a lot of brewers in our area use that because they're afraid of alienating a certain segment of their customers. As far as no oxidation, he did go over his options, and I think his third option, which he said is a compromise of, basically crashing it for a couple of days, getting it into a keg when there's still maybe a half degree Plato left, and letting it kind of letting the little bit of activity remaining be like an oxygen scavenger is a great method. So it's not pure. It's not as pure as spunding.
Well, and if you do what I was going to recommend, which is to find the most flocculent yeast possible for the style that you're making, even if you rack it into your keg with a couple points left to ferment, so that it scrubs that oxygen from the racking process, that yeast is going to drop out once it gets cold, and from there you're going to just suck it out, and your first couple of pints might be basically just true, but
Yeah, doing a closed transfer and spunding is going to give you the least amount of oxygen, right?
Yeah.
But I haven't seen it to be necessary for a lot of beers. Is it ideal? I think it's the best solution if you're worried about that and you think it matters and you're going to store it for a long time.
Yeah.
But people just rack over, in just literally from a carboy into a keg. And, if you don't make a dog's lunch out of it, you're not splashing it around or whatever, you're pretty much going to have a good beer. Now, you can take extra steps like inerting the keg with CO2, doing a couple drain and fills, with some star sand and then pushing it out with CO2, which has a small, itty bitty, tiny bit of oxygen in it still. But basically, you're talking degrees of oxygenation, right? So you can go crazy with this stuff. And if that's what you like, that's awesome. And if you just want to rack it on over from a carboy into a keg, as long as you're not splashing and going crazy, that works too. Next question from Joel Farabee in Sarasota, Florida. His question has to do with recipe formulation. Other than our first brew, an extract kit, all of our beers have been all grain, recipes of our own design. As I read a lot of recipes available online, I see a ton of them use a bunch of different malts. And he goes on to say how a lot of commercial beers more or less only have a couple malts. And he wants to know that he sees our recipes are simple compared to many that he reads online. Are there any stipulations that our
Is he
beers...
making fun of us? That feels like he's like patronizing us a little bit.
No.
You guys are simpletons.
A lot of commercial beers don't have a lot of different malts. And basically, he goes on to ask, are there any stipulations or beers, or situations or beers, where you would use any of these non-flavor character malts or body malts, like, for carapils or, dextrin, something like that?
We have an episode of the Brülosophy podcast. I think it was released last month on carapils, and we've done an experiment with that one. Ray did an experiment. I don't use carapils anymore. I got rid of it as soon as those experiment results came out, mainly because of my own personal experience with that malt and it not really having any impact, and then the results kind of confirming that. There are other malts, though, that absolutely do have an impact just based on flavor alone. Things like melanoidin and aromatic. Acidulated malt works great if you don't want to use liquid acids to adjust your pH. And there's some argument that acidulated does have some sort of a flavor impact as well. So I think the reason you see a lot of commercial breweries using really simple grist. One is because it keeps things simple and it keeps things cheaper. If you're making a bunch of beers that have a ton of these specialty malts, you have to buy that specialty malt by the sack. For one, but also, I mean, my argument would be that it makes better beer sometimes. The simpler the beer, the more you get to taste it, the less you have to think about it, really. And to me, that's a big thing. For us, though, for Brülosophy, one of the reasons we keep things simple is because we are doing experiments and we want to make sure that the variable, stands out and that there's not anything covering it up.
I keep things simple because I like simple malt bills. I think few things are better than, a German Pils or a Belgian Pale or Belgian Golden, which has like two, base malt and sugar, or base malt and maybe
dark candy syrup or something
Carahel,
like that.
Carahel. So, yeah, he mentions melanoidin, which you talked about, and aromatic. Well, they have huge flavor impact, so you got to use those real sparingly. And one of the ways to do that is make like little teas of these malts. You can make little teas on your bench top or your desktop with like a coffee press or something like that, and taste them, and you'll find like aromatic. A little goes a long way. Same thing with melanoidin. Little goes a long way.
When deciding how to use, darker malts or crystal malts, I just kind of stick with, to be honest with you, what I'll do is I'll open up Beersmith and as I'm designing my recipe, I take it to where, I think the color is right. And then where in my own experience, that flavor impact is where I want it to be. And that's really how I decide. If I want more raisin, I go with a darker crystal malt. If I want more candy or kind of just a sweeter impact without much flavor, I'll go with a lighter crystal malt. So that's how I do that. So
and making those teas really helps there, and that's also a real great homebrew club experiment. Or even just a group of brewers, friends in a garage, whatever. Make a couple of these teas and taste them and make some notes, because then that's the only way you really master ingredients.
All right, next question from Sean Fank. How do you guys approach setting up and building a water profile for your beer? I just started building my water, trying to get it in on the on the New England IPA craze, and I'm absolutely lost. I'd be interested in getting some tips on how and where to start and what has worked well for you guys. Sean, we've got the perfect response for you. Malcolm, take it away, man.
Oh, man. This is an episode by itself, and we talked a little bit about this on the minerals episode. But I essentially have a multi-step process, and it goes like this. Find out where your water is, so get a sample. Find out where you want to be. So for a New England IPA, you could look at some of our friends' sites like Ed Coffee, Ales of the River Wards, ScottJanish.com. Find other trusted recipe sites, and then you see what they're doing for their water. So you know where you are and how you want to adjust it. So you take your water profile that you just got from Word Labs or from calling your local municipality or from Brü Lab results, and you enter it into Brewing Water. Then you adjust to where you want your target is by changing the minerals. And then you see how that impacts your mash pH. Say you want your mash pH to be about 5.3 to 5.4. After you have considered your minerals and you've entered your grist, you have to add acid to get to your desired mash pH. That's where you are. Whether or not you want to use the 1-to-1 ratio of sulfates to chloride or go the opposite and go more chlorides, maybe you want to go 2-to-1 ratio chlorides to sulfate, you can add that into the bottom window of Brewing Water by changing how much salt you add, and you can see it changing right before your very eyes. It's like magic. It's just math, and you basically sit there and say, oh, I'd like to have 150 ppm of chloride to 50 ppm sulfate. You add your minerals, see how it affects your pH because you're adding calcium, change your acid, and away you go. Then you taste the beer, you brew the beer, you taste it with your friends, and you say, do I like it? If you don't, you go back and adjust it.
Yep.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. I think the way I approach water, and I recall feeling like it was going to be a lot more daunting than it is. First thing I would recommend, go download Brewing Water, the Brewing Water spreadsheet. I also use Beersmith, and so I kind of use them in conjunction. So I go to Brewing Water, I plug everything in, read the instructions. You'll learn how to do that. After plugging that stuff in, I get to where I want to be in terms of all of my mineral stuff, and I know how much to do that. So I'll go add that to my Beersmith. To my Beersmith design, the recipe design, and then I go and I make my water. It's that easy. It's really not difficult. I these days I don't use any other minerals except for gypsum and calcium chloride, and then the acid I use is 88% lactic. I do that for every beer. Piece of cake. It literally takes me, determining what minerals to use takes me maybe 3 or 4 minutes. And then measuring it out and adding it to my brewing liquor before I always collect my water the night before I brew, and then measuring out my gypsum and calcium chloride's a piece of cake, maybe 2-3 more minutes. So it's really not as scary as you think it is. And if you mess up, that's also, you're not going to ruin your beer. I mean, there are people I know of who've got 400 plus ppm sulfate and they're making fine beer. So just be careful and to measure stuff out properly, but I think you're going to be okay.
Hey, and another quick tip is when you make a beer that's specific, so for a New England IPA, I save it as a different copy and say, this is my New England IPA profile. And that way, if I go back in, another brew day, a couple weeks later down the road, you're only making 1 or 2 adjustments, and you end up, you'll see everything converge, and you'll end up just like Brewing Water has profiles. You'll kind of have like this New England IPA profile, West Coast IPA profile. This is my lager profile for Pilsners, for German Pilsners. So
I know Jake does the same thing, and I think that's really clever. I have a single copy, a single spreadsheet for all my water stuff, and it's just so easy for me to go in there and update everything. But I think that's a really clever approach per style. It's interesting. I've realized a lot of these questions have to do with water. And our final question from Kenneth Knott in Virginia, it also seems to be about water chemistry.
I'm hoping you can expand a bit on how and when to take mash pH measurements during the brew day and what to expect at different points along the way. I use Beersmith for my salt additions and pH adjustments. I've compared it to Brewing Water, and they're close enough that I'll just use Beersmith since it's easier to work with.
Yeah.
So let's start with that one.
Yeah. So that you know what? The fact that they're so close is a good thing. And the only reason I continue using Brewing Water is besides the fact that I think Martin Brungard is just an absolute genius and deserving of all of the attention and respect that he gets for that spreadsheet. is that because it's what I know and it works really well. And if Beersmith is working fine for you, and like Malcolm said, a million times, if your results are good enough, and you're happy with your beers, and there's no reason to change what's already working. The pH adjustments, we've already talked about this a little bit. I take all of my pH measurements. As soon as I mash in, I set a timer for 10 minutes. The time it takes me to walk out from making breakfast for my family and take a pH measurement, which I usually will pull off, I'll Vorl off a little bit just to make sure that I'm getting homogenized sweet wort. And then I take 3 ounces or so in a taster glass, and I throw that in the freezer in my garage, and I let it sit there for another 15 minutes or so. And then that's when I let it cool down to below 80 degrees, and I take a pH reading there, and that's what I do every single brew day, every single time I brew, and that's it. I don't know if that's about as simple as it gets, I guess.
Yeah, so Kenneth, not from Virginia here, goes on about taking mash pH measurements, all these different points, and he said he's inquired about other people doing the same thing, and he goes on this story about this path that pH takes. So what I would say is that you can do that, and it's actually pretty good for learning. So you can do it for a little bit, and what you'll find out is that these changes of pH are going to be more or less the same in every brew. You're going to get a predictable drop in the mash, you're going to get a predictable drop in the boil, and you'll get a predictable drop in the fermentation. And if your mash isn't too far out of bounds, if you're not in the extremes, it'll be okay. And then if your boil, as long as you're close enough and you get protein coagulation, it'll be okay. And then you get to fermentation, yeast is a great equalizer, and it's probably going to be pretty close. I've gone to the extremes for some sour beers and stuff like that, for kettle souring. And then I've found that the yeast won't drop the pH as much as typical in a pre-soured wort. And that's just because of their buffering capacity. They more or less try to regulate their external environment, So the long and short of it is, if you want to take pH all the way through the process, by all means do it. And then you learn, and you can start to go research what the processes are occurring that are causing those changes and what effect they purportedly have on brewing. But in the end, what I do and what Marshall does is we just set the pH during mash. It'll carry through, and if we don't like the result, we change it next time.
Yep. And, one more thing to consider is the experiments that we've done, not that they're, biblical truth by any means, but, we've done experiments comparing super low mash pH to a standard pH and a super high mash pH to a standard pH. The fact that both of those came back non-significant and pretty solidly so. I mean, I couldn't tell the high mash pH beer apart from the other one. And, we're using specific methods. We haven't tested this out with fly sparging or anything like that. But that's something to consider. I do, for me, I'll speak for myself. I certainly don't worry too much about mash pH these days. I still adjust for it. Again, it's insurance, and that's how I look at it. But, my process involves me taking a reading at 10 to 15 minutes into the mash, and that's what works, and it's working out just fine. So, but I appreciate the question. Hopefully, we were able to help everyone out, and that we responded appropriately. Malcolm, any final thoughts? We're moving into the holiday seasons here. I
think me and all the other contributors are accepting Christmas gifts. So send them over to. No, I'm kidding. No, I got 3 kids now, so I'm looking forward to a house full of kiddos during Christmas. It's kind of a magical time of year for that regard, and I'll just be chilling out, brewing some beer and drinking some beer.
Hell yeah, man. I'm looking forward to it as well. Some time off of work, just hanging out with family, doing what matters, and drinking really good beer. Happiest of holidays to everyone. We really do love you. And we've got some fun stuff planned for the future, and another episode, to drop soon, and it will be in the new year. And that new year is going to bring weekly episodes of the Brülosophy podcast. Thanks to all of your support. If you enjoy what we're doing and you want to help us to continue bringing you more of these shows, head over to brülosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can help us out. And don't forget to check out the rewards you can get for supporting us at patreon.com/brülosophy. If you have any questions you want answered on a future Brü A episode, you can email them to marshall@brülosophy.com, or if you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, you can ask there too. It'd be really cool if you'd subscribe to this podcast and leave a review. We'd really appreciate that. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back soon with the next episode of the Brülosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more.